Ashok.
Thank you, Joni, for a lovely introduction. And you'll see a flip chart here, and some of you have seen me make presentations before in the spirit of a meditation, not as an academic lecture. That's out. Really, please see my presentation as continuing the beautiful opening of our voices to help dilate and open the space for an experience of the shift that we're reflecting upon. So think of it as a meditation. And as was pointed out, I've been here 43 years as a philosopher, and coming out of logic and ontology, the science of the grammar and logic of being. What does it mean to be? That's been my background, and it grew into a global enterprise across the planet, trying to bring our different worldviews together and to see that we haven't really found a way yet to move across our worlds and our great traditions, our religious, spiritual traditions and disciplines. And there's a deeper kind of intelligence that is emerging as part of this great shift. So what I'm going to do is get up on to that flip chart and try to create a live PowerPoint as I speak to take us on a tour. This meditation is going to be attempting the impossible, to go on a tour of looking at our great evolutionary innovators, pioneers, elders across the planet, and to see that as long as we remain in our more localized ways of thinking, which is what most of us do all our lives, most of us don't realize that we're groomed from in utero all the way through, from the time we enter the world with our parents and our schooling and culture. The lens of our mind is being formed. And it can be a complex lens. And most of us never step back enough in our dilated awareness to see, I have a lens. And what I see in the world, and all that I am, and all that I process, and all that I feel is a function of the lens of the mind that I'm using. The reality of my world is filtered through and co-created with my lens of my mind. Most of us don't get that. And you begin to see it when you cross cultures, cross different worldviews, and realize they're seeing the world in a profoundly different way. And most of us remain, therefore, relatively localized. Even if our lungs, I don't mean to say our lens cannot be complex. To be an everyday American citizen, we have multiple lenses going. We may be a believing Christian or Jew in the biblical lens and see the world that way. You could be a scientist and really understanding the Darwinian story or the story of science and the Big Bang. So part of me is realizing that Genesis is right. That's the world is created by let there be light. And in another lens of me, another me, because each lens opens up a different world and space, and I become a different me, and most of us don't realize that. And I'm a civic American, and I really believe in keeping religion out of the political space. And that creates another deep tension because my religious world says breathe and live love of God in every breath. How can you keep that out of your political life? We're political animals. We're political beings. So that creates another lens to seek to be a civic, secular being. And so on, right? And it goes on and on. And the point about my theme is awakening global enlightenment. That's a very daring thing to say. Just the word enlightenment itself is spooky enough. It sounds so far away. Buddhas maybe, Krishnas maybe, Christ, Jesus maybe, right? And some of Lao Tzu, some of our great elders and geniuses, men and women of history may have been enlightened, but not us. It seems so far away. And what I'm going to suggest in the tour and the meditation we're going to do together as I start to sketch the evolution of our great elders and to bring us to this moment here. What we begin to see if we step out of our more local lens wherever we are and say, what's happening on the planet? Dare I dilate my heart and mind into a wider open space and dance across different visions and voices of our great teachers in different voices of what enlightenment is. What is it to enter wisdom? Can we bring it to life? What you see, if you could step back and entertain that wider space and dance across spiritual enlightenment worlds and narratives, something astounding begins to come into focus that we couldn't see before if we remain relatively localized. Because what we find, if we look at Buddha's great wisdom, Buddha's enlightenment, for example, I'm just going to give you samplers. We're already on the trail now. You're on the tour with me, right? Because what I hope to do is to listen to these great voices and go into the depths of what they call enlightenment, and to see that they're all pointing to one fundamental diagnostic of our human journey. So when you look into Buddha's Great Awakening, which was a global event, the Four Noble Truths, after his torment to try and find why humans are suffering, he came up with this clear diagnostic as a deep physician into the condition of suffering in the human situation. He saw and presented in Four Noble Truths to the people to be very understandable, like four axioms, global. They're noble because they're global for all worlds. When I say global, I don't mean in the sense of global internet or global corporations. In philosophy, global means across diverse worlds, worldviews, lenses. And one of the premises is when you cross worlds, most of us don't know how to do that well and critically, and in a mindful way, you go into different realities. If you're raised in the Judeo-Christian space, and you dare to cross into the Chinese mind, or African modes of thought, or into the space of the Lakota people, you see a different world. You're a different you. When you cross worlds, if you can, worldviews, different lenses, you enter different realities. So what Buddha saw when he awoken, and Buddha means awakened one, he saw that everyday unawakened existence where most of us live is suffering. Existence, ordinary unawakened existence is suffering. First axiom. Second, it has a cause. Science. We are the cause. How we are living and making ourselves. To be ego-based as a thinker is to suffer. So the existence created by our ego mind and ego lens and ego world is suffering of all kinds. Loss of meaning, depression, not just pain, not just hunger, not just thirst, not just poverty. That's superficial. Existential suffering of the human being, not being fulfilled and being in despair and loss of meaning. That's the kind of suffering. If you're in the ego existence, you're going to suffer. If you're going to cling to the self who's making that world, the ego, that's the cause. Now you're doing science. The third axiom, we have a choice. The axiom of choice. We don't have to use our minds in that egoic way. What is going on with the ego mind? Now, that's going to be one of our central themes. Because as we dance across these great visionary enlightenment stories and revelations, they all seem in their own unique way to hearken to one fundamental point. That if you're living in the ego-based mind, you're going to be dysfunctional, you're going to be incomplete, you cannot be fulfilled, you cannot become a full human. You've got to evolve out of that state. It's like the caterpillar stage prior to the butterfly. I use the pun, we have to go from ego pillars to Buddha flies. And no joke. I mean, and the evolutionary story about that stage of the caterpillar in its evolution, ego-based thinking and making your world. We separate ourselves without realizing that this can be pernicious and deadly and pathological and create all kinds of cultural, personal, interpersonal, institutional breakdown. When you use the ego way of thinking, it's also mono-mind, monocentric. You privilege your lens, you identify yourself, your identity of your culture and your own upbringing. You objectify your world, you see it through that way, so it's I and me and everything is other. The signature of ego mind or ego way of living, you may not have thought of that, is almost a worship of the law of identity. Ego mind is a kind of religion, a religion of the mind, because everything comes from that, your whole world. How you read scripture would come from that. And what we're going to see, which is almost a scandal on the planet, is all of our great teachers are calling us to go to the higher script. Somehow make that rite of passage out of the ego-based way that cuts you off from the unified fundamental force field of reality. The ego mind is alienated from that. So the journey of human awakening the journey of awakening consciousness, is to somehow leave that caterpillar, ego pillar stage, painful and challenging as it may be. It's frightening to do that. And to go into and let go and go into the awakened state, which is what enlightenment is. Buddha's enlightenment, his version, the fourth noble truth. The axiom of choice is the third. We can use our minds differently. How? That was the fourth noble truth. You could practice mindful living in every breath 24/7. The eightfold path of rehabilitation of the mind, rehab. That word is important. The highest truth for Buddha is we've got to rehab our minds, rehabilitate new habits, patterns. Of what? Break the ego separation, fragmenting way of using our minds and go into flow, go into mindfulness, go into the holistic Buddha field. What do we call that? Call it emptiness, Buddha would say. Why call it emptiness? Because if you give a name, you're going to have the danger of keeping it in the ego box. All of our words are ego box words. And if you're in the box, you're going to suffer. So enlightenment is somehow crossing through that into the higher awakened space. And then you are flowing with reality. The more colloquial way that, in terms of user-friendly, athletes know that in that spontaneous moment, when they're somehow on the playing field, whether as a runner or on the soccer field, you have that magic moment, you leave your ego center and you are clicking with the game itself. You become the game, you become the running. It's not I am running, but running am I. You are in the flow, you're in the zone. What is that zone? That's a unified field. We're born for that, it's our birthright. And if we know the technology of leaving the separating way of using our minds and alienating from ourselves and each other, and can cross into flow and be in the zone, that's the life of enlightenment. That's mindful living. Enlightenment was not meant to be far away and inaccessible to everyday people. The point of Buddha and teachers like Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, I'll get to that in a moment, or Jesus, right? Unless you die, you can't be born again. And to cross into Christ consciousness, that's another call in a different font of that journey into awakened life, to become a full human being. So that is supposed to be what our journey is. That's our evolutionary journey. And you'll see that Barbara Marx and Bruce Lipton, in each in their own genius way, will develop their versions of the conscious evolution, spontaneous evolution, in this context of the call of becoming a full human being. That's what we're talking about. Switch lenses for me for a moment. So if you practice a life, imagine that. If I lived my life mindfully, and centuries of Buddha's technology going through China and into Japan. So it goes into Zen, and Zen is that practice of the philosophy. What is all of Zen? Be here now. Be here now. Be in the moment. When you chop wood with all you got. Be the chopping, be the event. When you carry water, carry water. When you sit. Zazen is sitting. If you can do one thing, full-heartedly and mindfully, you're doing everything. That's a Buddha-fly effect, the butterfly effect. Right? It affects the entire field when you can cross into the field, the deeper field of reality. I'm just playing with different of these stories to get us warmed up in this meditation. And if we go into the story of Bhagavad Gita, I'm going to jump up on the stage and find my pen. If you go into the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu Vedas, you have a different language now. Buddha broke from that. He was a Hindu prince, and he broke to find his own way of presenting awakening. But if you go into the Bhagavad Gita, it begins with a breakdown. Arjuna, the warrior, in the fight with his family, sees that he can't kill his own people. And his everyday life, his ego-based warrior life and culture collapses. He has a midlife crisis on the battlefield. Very inconvenient. And he drops his weapon and says, Krishna, my whole ethic as a warrior can't work for me. I can't kill my uncles, I see my teachers, my friends, I can't kill my own people, it can't be right. And his ethics breaks down. He goes into a complete meltdown at the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. What an amazing moment. That's each of us. That's the ego person breaking down. When the ego structure collapses, it's unsustainable. So when Arjuna breaks down, his charioteer is Krishna, the Om voice. And you're going to see a pattern here that I'll put up, that all of our great wisdom, awakening, enlightenment teachers across the planet, if you just scan that for a moment, and then you'll begin to see the astounding news, the headline news of our time. If you go into ancient China, Lao Tzu, you find out the opening lines of his great wisdom text. The Tao that is named is not the Tao. What is Tao? The infinite name for the infinite field of reality. Tao. But here, when I gesture here to the lower place, that's where most of us live in our script, in our lens, in our ego-based language. That's all we know. That's the only literacy we have. So you can't blame us. If you have an ego script and an ego mind and an ego lens, that's a level of language development here. So when I gesture here, this is the ego-based thinking space. When I gesture here, this is where all of our wisdom teachers and enlightenment technologies are urging us to somehow leave this ego pillar stage and go into the higher script. So all of our scriptures are announcing, so Yahweh, the founding of the Judaic noble tradition, God, Yahweh, the infinite word, the infinite spirit, speaking to the human situation, right? And you can think of the plight of Abraham, just at the most basic point in this missing story that I'm trying to bring out. If you see that the infinite Yahweh is saying to all of the people, love me with all your heart. Love, the song we had. And that means place what is first, honor it. If you're not aligned to honoring what is first and treating it as first, giving it priority, then everything in the deep structure of your life is off. So the call of the infinite to the human condition, love me with all you've got, means something profound. And every human has to face it. Am I putting my agenda first? So if Abraham, in that case, this is a proto-human, is saying, I have my Isaac, finally. My Isaac, right? This part of his identity. That's what he values. He treasures that. And he's living his life in that situation. But the other force is saying, put me first. What does that entail? The scary situation that he's somehow going to let go of that story. Let go of Isaac. Sacrifice Isaac. As horrifying as it sounds. And of course, Abraham, in this script, but being open to the higher script, the scripture, right, hears that call and he's tormented. Do I put the call of God? Do I really believe it and put it first? So much so that I'm going to give up everything I got for it and place that first. So the call of what is primal and first, the call of reality, the unified field itself, pulls on us in every moment of our, it's the infinite force. It's not negligible. It's greater than gravity. The greatest forces that pull on every iota of existence of the infinite force in every moment. It's operative on each of us. So in that case, the choice to let go of Isaac and to put God's call first is a great moment on the planet in terms of the same story. That somehow, if you're putting the ego story, lens, script first, something is profoundly misaligned and disaligned, and we've got to realign ourselves evolutionarily to put the first. That's one of the axioms of the planet. What is first? Honor is first. So the Chinese are calling it Tao, and the wisdom enlightenment says the Tao that is named in the ego space ain't the Tao. Switch to Om. The great seers and meditators, the enlightened minds, the yogis who are seeing into the space, call it in their language, Om, Brahman. Meditate on Om. Om is the infinite sound, the infinite like Tao. All comes from Om. It's basic science. It's saying the ultimate source is infinite. And any story of evolution you're going to get, in fact, every story you can come up with is going to come out of that script. It funds every perspective, every script, every worldview, every form, every name. Om, Tao, Yahweh, Allah. Whatever name you use for the infinite, Christ, God, that cannot be put down into the everyday ego script. That's been the call of enlightenment and wisdom and awakening. And that is our evolutionary challenge. So that in the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna starts to counsel, and this voice of Om, Krishna, speaks to Arjuna, the everyday ego-based human who's fallen apart and turns to Krishna. And that's a prerequisite for going into wisdom and enlightenment. where you realize your everyday life and form has imploded on you. Then the dialogue starts, and Krishna understands that Arjuna is ready for the journey. Just to picture it then, you have all of these calls across the planet, whether it's Tao, I hope you can see this up there, or Om, or Yahweh. Yes. Thank you. This one is resurrected. Thank you. Tao, Om, Yahweh, and we could just keep on going. Buddha calls it Shunyata. Emptiness, zero-ness. Shunya is zero in Sanskrit. So Buddha didn't want to use any name like this, right? He wanted to use something, emptiness, empty of all of these marks, and to not taint this high infinite field with a name from this space. So in this space, what is this space? It's really, let's call it the ego-based space. What does it look like? Well, there's me, the I, and then there's my lens looking out, and I have a lens. I'm marking it here. The lens I have will show me my world. It's almost a screen of my awareness. So if I have a biblical lens, I believe in the biblical story, I will see one. If I have a Newton lens, I will see a Newton world. If I have an Einstein lens, I'll see an Einstein world. If I have a Bruce Lipton, I'll have something else. When you shift the lens, your world shifts. So there are many, many different stories all through culture, all over, where different worldviews showing up in this base space. And this script, logicians call it the place, Aristotle, who discovered logic, the logic of consciousness, the logic of thinking, of reason, in this space. S is P, subject is predicate, pen is blue, I am man, sun is shining. To think in this place is to predicate, to join pieces of information. How? According to the law of identity, which seems innocuous. What is identity? A thing is what it is. A is A. A is A. That's the law of identity. And when you say A, when you say I, you distinguish everything that's not I. It's a double-edged sword, identity, that I purchase I can I by distinguishing and pushing off what is not I. So identity cuts. It slices and it severs. And every word we have keeps going that way. Space is severed, time, cause, everything, substance, you name it. Every word keeps getting broken down into bits and pieces. And what am I? Well, I put my little tags on me. I'm American, I'm male, I'm father, And if anyone says, sits down to coffee, tell me who you are, you start giving your predications. You start saying, I'm this, I was a valedictorian, I was on the team. You predicate. And we do this naively and comfortably. And we live here. And our great teachers are saying, if you do that to yourself, if you predicate and impredicate yourself in this way of thinking and technology, it's going to split you and objectify you, because here's a thinking subject and there's an object. Everyone you think about will be an object. Even your loved one, your lover. I'm here, it. You'll make them an it, because you package them in that technology. That's what most of us don't realize. And the point that the geniuses saw is that there's something about, and I usually mark this script with single brackets. I don't want this to get too overcrowded, but just think that this script that is it's a stage of our evolution. This ego-based script is almost like an adolescent stage of a development. However it got here, however it worked, if you get stuck there, that's the problem. That's what our great teachers are seeing. It falls apart, it breaks you from flow. The main insight of enlightenment and wisdom of these great stories, and I've just given a few of them that can go on and on. I don't have time, I don't need in this tour through the evolution of consciousness, is that the basic insight here is that reality is an interconnected, infinite field of flow, of connectivity. And when you break it out into this space, you separate out artificially. And if you're using an ego-based way of thinking, you're chopping and breaking into pieces, and then you get different worlds, And each worldview is different. They can't talk to one another. There's no real dialogue. You can't have true relation flow in this space. And you get battles and breakdowns across worldviews. You get 9/11s, you get holocausts, genocides, ethnic cleansing, racism, sexism, on and on. All of the isms are taking certain ideologies and they don't compute, they can't communicate, they can't be in deep relation. So the call to dialogue is through the logos. One of the words of the great wisdom traditions, of course, of the Greek is a logos. As a logician, I like to use this as a scientist because that's the word for science. The Greek Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the geniuses of the Greek early European tradition, spoke of the logos. Listen not to me, but to the logos, or Heraclitus says. Listen to the logos. And the logos Sophia. That's the Greek version for what is that? Logos is the infinite force, a mind, a reason, the light of the mind, enlightenment. So if you can get the logos, if your mind can dilate out of the cave into the light, which is Socrates, in his wisdom journey. Socrates saw that we buy the objects that we see at a face value in our senses, and most of us live there, and he calls that in the cave. And Plato said that the journey of philosophy, and I hope you realize that Sophia, my field of philosophy is philosophia, lover of Sophia. In the song it came out, the Song of Sophia. So philosophy is lover of Sophia. Sophia is wisdom. And if we're Homo sapiens, what is sapiens? Sophia. So Homo sapiens and evolution are supposed to be the wisdom rising beings. But ego sapiens are not fully wise. Ego sapiens are pre-human. Sorry. Ego sapiens are not logo sapiens. So if another word for this field is logosophia, the infinite feminine, the infinite force of the mind, of reason, this is the place of reason. This is the place of deep awakened mind. So the journey of philosophia is out of the cave of limited consciousness and intelligence into dilated awareness of awakened reason. The light of reason is enlightenment. So all of the European journey, if you follow this through the centuries beyond Plato, who was trying to get to the highest form of all forms, in the journey of wisdom, in the birthing of wisdom in the political situation to bring justice. All in Plato's Republic is a journey into the deepest form of all forms. And that is a logos. So when the Christian birthing tradition, when John begins his gospel and borrows a logos word from the Greek in the Hellenistic and Hebrew traditions coming together, John says, in the beginning is a logos. And the logos became flesh. And he uses that language to explain the unfolding, the evolutionary unfolding of that Christ story in that case. So that in the case of the Christ story, we talked about Abraham, and we could go into Moses, but talking about Jesus, the journey there was to see that you can't write the law here, the law of love. You've got to write it here in your heart. So Christ consciousness is a journey, again, that crossing from the space of separation or sin, which is separation from flow with the infinite. This is where the boundary crossing in that language is that to awaken is to let this die so that you can rise into Christ consciousness, which is where you experience love. Why this theme of love? Because crossing from this broken place of I, where the other is an it, whether the other is your neighbor, the other culture, the other religion, the other discipline, whatever the other is, it becomes alienated. But when you cross into this deep space of connected flow, a miracle happens. All of our teachers got it across the planet. And this is where ethics ignites and comes to life. Ethics. What is ethics? Not in the box of right rules to conduct, but ethics is moving in conscious evolution and awakening to be one with the flow and the law. In Buddha's language, the Dharma, capital D, is the fabric of the unified field of shunyata where everything is interconnected flow. So if my mind can surf that space, which is what mindful living is, what do you find in that world? Everything is connected and flowing. The other is in you, and you are in the other. That's the I-thou. There's relation, but not broken relation, an alienated relation, but intimate relation. So when we cross into this space, and I use double parentheses to mark it, you'll notice that on the program, the forum, right? The forum is used with the double brackets to call us into meeting in this space of deep dialogue and synergy. In this space, when we talk, each from our own lens, we have, even though we're talking, an alleging dialogue is really monologue. Ego-log is monologue. Meaning what? You speak from your lens and interpret the other through your lens, and you're not getting into dance with them in their perspective as well. Dialogue, which is dialogos. The word dialogue doesn't mean two. It means through the logos. Through the logos. I use dialogos via Sophia. When you go into this space, that's when you find deep connection. When you stay here, it's broken and you get war and breakdown and violence and divorce, alienation and suffering. It's amazing. I don't have time now. Maybe in conversation we'll take time, because if you can see this is one of the great missing links in the missing story. If you begin to see the story, it opens up something that's to me almost scandalous. My God, why haven't we seen it? If all of our genius teachings across the planet seem to converge in one thing, don't get stuck here. It's pre-human. To become a moral being is to rise to the place when Jesus said, for example, when I was in prison, you visited me, and when I was hungry, you fed me. He was using me in a different sense than here. And his disciples who were speaking this language naturally said, when did we do that? He replied in a very way analogous to Buddha, the I thou. When you took care of the least of mine, you took care of me. That's the I thou. What is the I thou? It's a deeper reality of connectivity, interconnectivity, and flow, and that is a place of compassion. That is the law of love. If you're facing the space of love, your other is not an object. Your other here, your I and the other, your lover, is not an object that you see through the lens of your ego. That's where the breakdowns come. So that's why, for example, you say men are from Mars and women from Venus. That little pun is really trying to say they're different worlds. They're not communicating. They can't talk. So that love in this space, single bracket love, ego love, is not the same as love in this space. What I'm doing in this short journey into the missing story of wisdom by sampling these great teachings is just to get something on the board for us before we go into the other presentations. It is to show that there's a missing script. The deeper script here is deeper and more powerful than the script here. What do I mean? Every word you use here, which is in the broken space, if you dare to cross into the line, into the field, whether you call it Om or Christ or Yahweh or Allah, whatever name you use, or in science, the unified field, the infinite unified field, the script opens up in a tremendous way. So I'm going to ask for the next slide, please. Let's start over. So again, just to simplify, and before I do this, I'm going to do something that's going to be a little bit scary, but it'll make it more user-friendly. What I was doing in the prior slide, which is a natural thing to do, says, here is where most of us are, and this is where our great enlightenment wisdom teachers have been calling us across the planet. We've got to upscript and dilate our lens. So here's one way of being in reality and being a human, and if, however we cross over, and I didn't complete the quick briefing into the Bhagavad Gita, I just mentioned that in passing. What Krishna was doing with Arjuna, chapter after chapter, meditation after meditation, was helping him go by yoga from the ego space into the Om space. Yoga is the science of quieting the ego mind and allowing the awakened Atman, the higher intelligence, to flow. That's what yoga is. Many of you may be doing yoga, but if you're doing ego yoga, it ain't yoga. The first axiom of yoga is yoga, Patanjali. Yoga is a quieting of predication. Unbelievable. So what is yoga? It's a technology of awakening to become your realized self. is going into the zone, the Om zone. And so again, that scary specter of how do I cross out of my ego story? Let that go. Do I dare? And cross over. What is there for me on the other side? I want to talk about that crossing, because that's what I want to focus on when I say awakening global enlightenment. If enlightenment is moving from the place of separation and fragmentation to dilated awareness and maturation as a human being into the place of flow, what you begin to realize, and my students have been, as I taught these texts on campus here for the last 30 or more years, the Dhammapada of Buddha, or the Bhagavad Gita of Krishna, or Descartes' Meditations, it's completely misread, I believe. Because when this genius, Descartes, began to see as a brilliant, innovative mathematician in developing analytical geometry, that he could question all of his beliefs. He said, is there anything certain in my life? Descartes asked at this point of his maturation. And he did an experiment to say, well, wait a minute. When I'm awake, I could be dreaming. And dreams aren't veritable. They're not trustworthy, because they seem to be phantasm and fantasy. So if my waking life could be dream, that's pretty bad. I have to lay that aside for a moment. And then he went in, oh, thank goodness for mathematics. 2 + 2 = 4. Even in my dream, that could be true. Then he said, wait a minute. What if there's a force capturing my mind to make me think it is true when it's not? And he realized, in other words, the separation from the thinker from what you think can always have a mistake and a cloud and a lens blocking you. And so what if I am deceiving myself? Self-deception. That's a scary thought. So Descartes pushed back deeper, and what happened? He reached I am. The great turning point for the culture. And he felt, now I reach someplace that's absolutely certain. I am. But he wasn't saying it in the ego box. Descartes' meditations were meditations. Meditation is a form of thinking that takes you into the depth. Predication is a form of thinking that takes you into the box. Predication is the main form of thinking we live by. And our geniuses have been taking us in a different journey of meditation, which is letting go of these stories and going into flow. Meditation. So when Descartes said, I am, he crossed for Europe. Amazing moment. One thing I love about Bruce, when he says as a very agnostic and scientist, doing his cellular biology, something happened. He'll talk to you about, and he discovered a spiritual source of the deep biology. And I said, bravo, because it's when you're an independent thinker and you come to those conclusions, it makes it even more powerful. So when Descartes, in a culture that did not have the technology of meditation as part of the course, discovered this I am independently as an independent thinker, it was a magnificent moment for Europe. And for when he went into the I am, he discovered something amazing. That when he said I am, here, in that space, he began to see there's an infinite thou. The infinite being was already present to him. That's a third meditation. People don't get it. They think he's talking in the box. Not at all. He saw in the I am, if you think it through, that I need not be. What if I stop thinking? As long as I think I am, he felt contingent and vulnerable, that the lights could go out. And that led him to meditate on, so what's making me know I'm finite? And he came in touch with the infinite. There we are, the Tao, Shunyata, Yahweh. He discovered it using his power of reason. He came into the infinite other. And then he said, that is the primary truth. I am, thou art. That was the unit. In other words, when you cross from this form of thinking into that, you don't discover isolation, you discover connectivity. You discover you're in deep dialogue. That's the point. You're in a field of vast, boundless connectivity and diversity. Each point in this field is absolutely unique. Each one of us is a unique miracle in this fundamental field. And yet, we're profoundly interconnected at the same time. That's what's hard to believe. That is a space of the technology of the high culture waiting to happen, and have been urged to come to that point. So think of Gandhi. To get an example, when Gandhi was reading and living by the Gita and the Gospels, he saw that this truth of the self is the Atman, not the ego. That's why he was called Mahatma Gandhi. What is that? That's a title. Atma is a self. What is Maha Atma? Maha is great. So his title was Mahatma Gandhi, when he started to live from this truth of the Om field and bring it into the political space to move mountains and marshal the people on the path to justice and liberation. And that's what Martin Luther King took and brought to the civil rights movement. Gandhi's method of satya power, truth force, to bring it into culture to change the world. I'm just trying to give examples. So that just think with me now as I wrap this up. And I think you feel you've been very intent and attentive. What I'm trying to show is that the picture, when I taught in my classes, students would say, Professor Gangadine, I can see that we're living here. And I know that we have access to that place. I listen to Buddha, I listen to Krishna, I listen to Descartes, I listen to these great thinkers. I don't know how to get there. It seems so far away. How can I, in my culture, get into the place of awakened enlightenment? And after a decade of this, saying, look, we have to separate these two languages. So this language, I use that marker, and this language, I use this marker. They're almost like quotation. I'm saying call it out, because all of our teachers were so intent that if you're in this space, you need to know it. And you have to be challenged to not bring that space down into here. What most of us do all across the planet is we do this. We put this script in our box. We download scripture into ego script, and we violate the script over and over. That's why the Judaic tradition, you don't write the name of God. Tao is not Tao. Om cannot go in the box. If you put God in the box, you kill God. As Nietzsche said, God is dead, and the Christians killed him. Meaning what? If you put God in the box, you've downloaded the infinite script and scripture into the ego script. And so this picture of putting it this way is not the same as this picture. This is what I'm suggesting now. By putting this outside, I'm capturing a fundamental axiom of global enlightenment, which is that we're always already in the infinite field. No human, whatever your story, however much you're going to ego, however many views you have, you are always in the field of the infinite force. You can't possibly step outside of it. If you see that, then it becomes more user-friendly. And I need the next slide. Students started to breathe, and when I do this around the planet, people say, I like this picture. Right? Because we're already there. Because when you write your name, if you write any word this way, put the ego lens on it and then place it within that field. Think of your name that way. Because if you can get this, if you could realize this is capturing deep global enlightenment. It seems to me when you look across a planet, if we're always in the infinite field, whatever name we call it, and it surrounds us all the time, which is common sense. Why? It's the most elementary point of science. The infinite cannot be broken down. If you break it down, you're going to get infinite. Every speck of the infinite has the infinite code within it. It's going to be fractal. It's going to have everything. You can't break a piece of the infinite off. You can't break a piece of Om off. And that leads to the mustard seed power. It leads to what Blake saw, the poet, when he says, infinity in a grain of sand, eternity in an hour. What does that mean? He's not talking ego script, he's talking the higher script. That's really what I want to help us to see. When you go into the higher script, every word in this script, every PowerPoint has infinite force within it. And that means each of us standing in that space of the awakened script is a PowerPoint, which is the power of one. And our great geniuses knew that. So when Jesus said, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. It's great physics. That's Satya power. This little guy, Gandhi, who was tapping the Om power and bringing it into culture, was discovering a technology that we have that within us. When the Quakers who founded this college, that's what the Quakers are doing. They saw there's that of God in every person. That's a huge thing to recognize. There's that of God in every person. Well, God is the infinite. So that means there's that of God, the infinite, in every one of us. What does that mean? Honor one another. Honor yourself. Don't make yourself an object. You're a sacred being. Treat each other that way. Upscale. Go into ethics. Sit in silence. That's a Quaker silence. When you go into a Quaker meeting, take down the icons from the wall, strip everything down, no more ministering or mediating. Each of us has the Christ immediately here. That's basic science. Every point, that's fractal. So when we heard from Greg Braden, fractal intelligence and fractal is an infinite recursive power. So if that's so, now we begin to see something. Every point in this field, if we can cross into the field of enlightenment, begins to tap the wisdom of the planet. Each of us, so in the Hindu language, when you go into the Om space, in the Atman, you are one with Brahman. Right? There are many ways to say it. If you go into the Buddha space of emptiness, you become overflowing with fullness of interconnectivity and compassion. That's Buddha's version of it. If you go into the Christ space, you will then tend to all of the persons without, the hunger, the thirsty. They're you. And John Donne, when he says, ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. When one person dies, you're affected in that calculus. So what we're looking at then is the journey of enlightenment. If this is true, then enlightenment is something like this. If you have a way to somehow ease up on the lenses that have ossified and encrusted your intelligence, loosen those lenses, be a critical thinker, dialogue, step out of the lens. And if you could drop them and detach from those stories, there you are. You're already there. That's what this picture is showing. You're always already. Your high self is with you in every moment. The connection with the infinite is right there at every moment. We're in the way. And if we have the courage to listen to that technology, so many of them, whether it's Buddha's mindfulness or Jesus' let it go or Krishna, yoga technology, and so on, if you could step back from that. And postmodern culture now, in the last 50 years and more, postmodern is recognizing that every identity can be deconstructed. Every story need not be an ultimate story. That's on this trail too. So the long evolutionary story of culture has been echoing this journey. And this great shift, I'm summing up now. What is the shift to the new full human culture? It's a shift from this to that. The shift from this to that is a journey of wisdom. The dropping out of your way of your fixated stories and opening up to a deeper flow, the greatest distance there can be to enlightenment is the shortest distance one can travel. Get out of your way, you're already there. That's really what the teachers were saying. If this is true, and I'd like you just to try and digest this, I'm going to conclude now. Enlightenment to the ego mind seems far away, but when you cross into the dilated lens, it is user-friendly. It's common sense, and we're born for that. That's what it means to be an awakened human being. So enlightenment is not something we can't afford to deal with. Enlightenment is something we can't afford not to deal with. Enlightenment is something that we have to own up to, and this is our moment of choice. This is what we're talking about as a great shift. So thank you for your attention.